When you look at almost any weapon in TF2, you can discern a clear intent with the weapon's design and make out exactly what situations the weapon is supposed to be used in. This is true of most of Heavy's miniguns. The Tomislav is more accurate, meaning that the bullet spread is lower, making this minigun perfect for mid-range. Alternatively, you could use the Silence Rev to ambush enemies, encouraging a more offensive playstyle that does well in mid-range. The Brass Beast gives you insane damage and a pretty nice damage resistance too, in exchange for making you much slower, which strongly encourages a defensive playstyle and rewards it accordingly. The Hualong Heater creates a ring of fire while spun up, meaning that the minigun is a natural spy deterrent. And additionally, it has a damage bonus against burning enemies, meaning that if you have good pyros on your team and or are facing a lot of spies, this minigun might just work out for you. And then you look at the Natascha. Compared to the rest of the miniguns, the Natascha seems to have very uninspired stats. It's unclear exactly what situation they wanted this minigun to be suitable in, although I do have an idea on that. In the beginning of the game's life, Heavy was a much weaker class. His minigun had a slower rev, a wider bullet spread, and you moved even slower while spun up. All this was put in place to make Heavy rely less on aim and more on positional awareness. The minigun was easier to aim than other high damage hit scan weapons, but he was very vulnerable when attacking, requiring good game sense to be used effectively. Enter the Natascha, which was the first unlockable minigun. I think that the Natascha was meant to double down on the easier aim aspect of Heavy, featuring a slowdown effect making tracking even easier in exchange for a damage penalty, although I could be wrong about this theory. So anyways, what even are the stats? Let's take a look and dissect them. The main selling point of this weapon to a lot of people is its ability to slow down enemy players on hit. This means that tracking with this minigun is a lot easier, and it can also prevent targets from escaping or closing the distance on you. This is a good upside, as TF2 is a heavily movement-based shooter, and all the classes that happen to be the most powerful are all very mobile. The other upside of this gun is a 20% damage resistance while spun up and below half health. This doesn't sound like that big of a deal, given how situational it is, but I find it helps a ton. It crosses a few very important damage thresholds. You can survive 2 quickscope headshots, 3 scattergun meat shots, 3 rockets, 3 pills, and will let you survive a lot of other random situations too. So right off the bat, these are pretty powerful upsides, but it also have some negating factors too. The first downside is a 30% slower rev speed. I don't think this downside is really all that bad, but it does have its moments where you really feel that slower rev. You will occasionally die because the minigun is too slow, but overall that isn't all that common. But now for the other downside, and this one is much more harsh, a 25% damage penalty. This means that it takes longer to finish off your enemies, which slightly counteracts the slowdown effect. In some situations you'd be better off using stock simply because you can kill them faster, but it doesn't completely negate the slowdown effect, because I did find that in a lot of situations, I know I wouldn't have killed them with stock, but the Natascha's slowdown effect helped me kill them. So with the stats done, I'm going to explain why the Natascha blew my expectations out of the water. I'll be honest, this video was originally going to be about why the Natascha is mediocre. My main arguments were that the damage penalty completely counteracts the slowdown effect, making it almost useless. And the slower spin-up time counteracts the damage resistance because sometimes you'll just die anyways because it spins up pretty slowly. And I have to say I was wrong about both of those. My points can be proven wrong simply by using the weapon. Just because it does less damage does not make the slowdown effect useless. As I've said earlier, while recording this video I found a lot of instances where I knew I wouldn't have killed my opponent with the stock minigun, or I would have taken damage, but the Natascha's slowdown effect massively helped. This helped mainly against scouts, demo knights, and pyros. I made the mistake of assuming the slowdown effect was only useful against retreating enemies, when that's just not true. About the other point, yes, the slower rev does partially negate the damage resistance, but after using the weapon more, I now see that this is an upside aiding the downside rather than the downside negating the upside. There's a difference. An example of an upside that aids a downside is the Market Gardener. When you use the Market Gardener correctly, you only need to swing it once, making the downside meaningless. On the other hand, an example of a downside negating an upside is the Brass Beast. The Brass Beast has insane damage, but that slower movement speed is a major handicap. It means you can't follow up on your extremely high damage output nearly as easily. I believe the Natascha falls into the category of the upsides aiding the downsides rather than the other way around. So I think it should be pretty clear by now that I think the Natascha is a good gun. But what's weird about this is that I can't exactly call this thing underrated, because half the people watching this will think, oh, obviously, and the other half will think, what? Public opinion on the Natascha's balance is largely split. Some people think it's overpowered. Some people think it's underpowered. I think this massive split is because of feedback. When you are playing as Natascha Heavy, the decreased damage feels massive and you don't really notice the slowdown effect, making it feel very underwhelming. But when you fight a Natascha Heavy, you rarely notice the decreased damage. Even if you do, it'll be heavily overshadowed by the slowdown effect. So how do we get the Natascha out of this limbo state that is its balance? Well, that's going to be really difficult, partially because this thing is just fine and casual, but it's actually banned and competitive. A team that can follow up on the stunning you're doing can be a real menace, all because one heavy is spamming bullets at them. And honestly, after thinking about it for a long time, I don't know how to rework this thing to make it less polarizing and unbanned in comp. I think a complete rework would be necessary for this thing, but I just don't know what to do with this gun. Its balance is so just weird. It's almost like the balance of this weapon is completely dependent on the team you're on. If they can follow up on the stunning you're doing, this thing is a monster. But if they can't, it's basically just a complete downgrade. So anyways, that's my video about the Natascha. I'm really pleased that the rocket jumper video started to gain some traction in the algorithm. So thanks to everyone who subscribed and or came from that video. See you in the next one.